Hello, welcome to ATI 4448. In this session, we are going to talk about project communications management. So as an outline for this session, we are going to first talk about communication definition, communication requirements, and then we are going to go over dimensions of communications, project communications management processes, and what affects communications, then effective communications and communication measures. So what's the definition of communication? Communication is the process of passing information and understanding from one person to another, and that's been defined by the Effective Project Management by Wysocki, the textbook that's assigned for this class. The purpose of communication is to transmit information from one place to another. And when you want this transmitted, you want it to be transmitted properly. You want the message to be sent and received, understood by the receiver, and accepted by the receiver. Communication is a two-way process where meaning is simulated in the mind of others using verbal and non-verbal messages. And this is a graph that will show you the two parties involved in communication, in the communication process, which is the sender and receiver, where the sender generates the idea, encoded, transmitted, and then that will be decoded and checked. Then the meaning will be understood from the receiver, and the feedback will be sent back to the sender, and so on. To communicate, you need the following. First, you need rules, protocols, policies, and standards. And this is what we have whether through the internet or through websites. We have policies and rules that we need to follow to communicate. And we need the language, whether we are talking about the people language, like the country language, English or French or any other languages, or we are talking about the language of the computer language, the programming languages, protocol languages, which is the language that usually transmitted over the internet, the TCP/IP, or other languages. So whatever the language is, it's been transmitted over certain protocols or certain ways over the internet, machine language, zeros, ones, or the proper English language, or network language, or whatever, and it's been transmitted over channels, using channels. So we have channels of communication, we have language, and we have the rules and protocols that we need to follow during the transmission of the messages. Dimensions of communications. If we look at the communication, we can identify that it can be either internal within the project team, or external with the customer, with other projects, maybe with the media or with the public. And we have formal communication and informal communication. For the formal communication, such as reports, memos, briefings. For the informal, maybe an email or ad hoc or discussions. For another category will be the vertical and horizontal communication. And when we say vertical, means up and down the organization. And for horizontal is within the peers themselves. We have also official and non-official or unofficial communications. For the official communications will be through newsletters, annual reports, and for the unofficial will be through off records of communications, whatever the channel is, maybe again through discussions or through emails. We have written and oral communication. We have verbal and non-verbal communication. The non-verbal will be through voice inflections and body language. And this is a diagram that depicts the internal communication and the external communication within an organization. And as you can see, for the internal communication, usually the individual communicate with the unit, which communicate with the management, and the management can communicate either with lower level, middle level, or top level of management, or it can be only one level of management on above that. At the same time, we have external communication that will be with the customer, maybe with the government, the public, the stakeholders, the suppliers, and the media. For the up and down, which is included, we said that it will be within the organization. So we have up the stream where it goes from the individual to the unit to the management, and down the stream where it goes from management to units to individuals. Usually the professional challenges will be up the stream, where actually you convey the message for the management that you have certain challenge and you would like to address it. The recognition communication will be down the stream, which will provide the sense of ownership for the employee. Feedback can be both ways, can be down the stream or up the stream. Either you are giving feedback to the management, or you are getting feedback from the management, either on an issue or through evaluation. Also, what to expect, it should be both ways of communication, from the management to the individuals, or from the individuals to the upper management. The project communications management processes are to identify the stakeholders, to plan for communications, to distribute the information, to manage stakeholders' expectations, and to report performance. So what do we mean by identifying stakeholders? It is the process of identifying all the people and or organizations impacted by the project and document their interest. The stakeholder analysis actually was explained in previous session. The definition here is from the PMBOK. Planning the communications. In this process, we determine the project communication approach that we need to follow during the project execution, including who needs the information and what kind of information to communicate. This is an example of a communication plan where we can combine quantitative assessment and qualitative analysis for a holistic view of measurement. And that can be introduced for the customer and for the administration. Benchmark performance monthly, quarterly, and annually, and that will be also presented for the administration. Analyze competitors' communication strategies frequently, and that also be introduced or be reported to the administration or communicated to the administration. and then track market activity to identify emerging trends or emerging technologies, and that will be also uh, to the administration, either to solicit their funding for those emerging technologies that might assist in the project, or can be added to project requirements, and that will be funded from the project budget. The uh, 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 second or the third process is distribution of information. Let's see. Yeah, it is the third process. So the third process is to distribute the information, and it's the process of making relevant information available to project stakeholders. Again, whatever information they need and who needs it, that should be identified in the plan, and then we start distribution the information that was identified or needed to the proper people. The dissemination of the information could be either two ways or one way. It can start from face-to-face, one-to-one conversations or meetings. It can be later on translated into electronic communication through email messages, maybe text messaging, electronic paging, radios, or websites or databases. Then it can be communicated through hard copies, such as memos, letters, documents, and reports, and that will be a one way of communication because that will be sent to the employees in the company or the project team, but it will be one way of communication because we are sending it, but we are not expecting any feedback or reply unless requested. The fourth one is to manage stakeholder expectation, which is the process of communicating and working with stakeholders to meet their needs and address issues as they occur. That will include negotiating the desire of the customer and concentrate on achieving project goals. Having the customer involved in project implementation or execution might include promises that's not within the project goals. So most likely we have to negotiate with the customer to keep them concentrated on project goals and not to add or do any major changes in the main objectives or goals of the project. Then to address their concerns that might become an issue later on. And if we have an issue, then we need to clarify and solve as soon as it has been identified. The tools and techniques that we can use to manage stakeholder expectation is to identify the proper method of communication based on the stakeholder that we are dealing with, whether it's a supplier, whether organization, whether it's a customer. So we need to know the proper method for the proper stakeholder. And then we build a trust between the two parties of communication or under communication. We need to resolve conflict, then use active listening to listen to the customer feedback or the employee feedback or organization feedback. Then overcome the resistance to change. Try to communicate as professional as possible, either with the upper management or with the customer. The resistance to change one of the issues within a project. And the last one is to report performance, which is the process of collecting and distributing performance information, including the status report, progress measurements, and forecasts. The reports, usually it will assess the past performances. It might report risk issues. It might report work completed, or it should report work completed, and it should provide summary of the changes. Measures It should measure the current performance through analysis to the performance, and we can do that by looking at the schedule or the actual work done versus the plan, or the budget versus the planned budget, the actual budget versus the planned, and from there we can judge if the performance is behind schedule or ahead of schedule. The tools and techniques that can be used in report performance is to analyze the variability between the baseline and the actual performance. And that's what I said when I mentioned the budget and the schedule. You can measure that and make sure that you are not behind schedule or over budget. And then the implementation, or the implementing forecasting method to make sure that you know the future, or the what's going to happen to the project to be completed, what needs to be done to be completed, what do I have outstanding and need to be completed. And that will be based on forecasted factors that might affect the project progress or the project completion. Some of the methods that can be used is time series method, the causal econometric methods, the judgmental method. We have also to measure communications to increase efficiency, and then create an effective reporting system for the project. What will affect the communication? The communications can be affected on different levels, either within the organization or organizational level. It can be within an individual level, or it can be from external factors. If we look at the organizational factors, then we are addressing the culture and style of the company, the structure of the company, the size and complexity, and the guidelines and procedures of that organization. For the individual factors, it depends on the workload and the communication and social skills. And what we mean by that, when we say workload, that means that if one of the employees or one of the team members has more than can be processed, or that can handle, he or she can handle, then at that point maybe he will be late in communicating through the email, or sitting in the meeting, or presenting reports, and that should be handled properly. And then, of course, the communication and social skills. Some people would don't like to present or to participate in discussions, and that will be more of like training. Let's say they need training to overcome their fear of communicating and discussion. And then we have the external factors, which is environmental factors that might be either natural factors such as rain if the project is outside, or natural disasters, or hurricanes, or storms. It might be political factors, it might be economical factors, or might be technology limitations. So it will be technological factor. So what's the definition of effective communications? Based on the research, I found these two definitions, one from Groover, which was introduced in 2005, and one from Northouse and Northouse, that's in 1998. The first one says effective communication is determined by the mutual giving and receiving of information in a style. And the second one is to effectively deliver the information. This can be for healthcare only, but it will say the healthcare professional must assess the situation the information delivered might affect the receiver. Since the second one is, although it's in healthcare, but I think that it can be generalized where we need to deliver the information effectively between two parties. But again, those are the two definitions that I found I liked, and I wanted to share with you. You will find many other definitions for effective communications if you search on the internet. And again, the purpose is to send and receive properly and effectively. And this is what we call effective communication. Communication measures usually to make sure that the communication is being done effectively and properly. We need to monitor the internal and external messages to make sure of consistency, and we can calculate the number of successfully received messages versus total received to make sure that I don't have a failing system that cannot receive or cannot communicate properly. And then we can calculate the number of communication errors due to system failure, such as software, hardware, functionalities, and the failure to follow standards or procedures, or the unavailable standards or procedures. And for these cases, either the procedure, standard or procedure will be revised, or a new standard or procedure will be put in place. But if we have a failure to follow, then the person that did not follow the standards and procedures can be accountable for his action. And then we can use the stakeholders to measure the performance of communication or efficiency of communication through surveys. That will be all for this session. If you have any questions, please email it through Florida Online. Thank you and have a great day.